Welcome to the Cycle Starters podcast, where we explore ancestral wisdom, healing, and the power of breaking generational patterns. I'm your host, Heather Rebecca Wilson, and today I am so thrilled to welcome Sasha Ostara, a somatic coach, storyteller, and mystic whose work centers on justice, decolonization, and embodiment. Sasha brings a unique perspective as a VITA Certified Sex, Love, and Relationships coach and somatic trauma resolution practitioner. Her work, known as Embodied EROS, helps people reconnect with their pleasure and liberation through a decolonial lens. In this episode, we'll explore Sasha's Mexican-Lebanese heritage, her journey with ancestral healing, and how she's helping others reclaim their body's wisdom. We'll discuss the revolutionary act of pleasure and the importance of honoring rather than fixing our bodies. Whether you're interested in somatic healing, ancestral work, or exploring your own relationship with pleasure and liberation, this conversation will offer valuable insights and practical wisdom. So let's dive in with Sasha. Hi, Sasha.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's such a pleasure to join forces.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you for doing all that you do, and thank you for saying yes to being on the podcast. How are you feeling today?
That's such a complicated question because I feel like we have the tendency to say I'm fine, but the truth is that there's so much going on in the world right now.
Yeah.
So my feeling is of hope and fear at the same time, interwoven, as I see everything going on around us and just waiting for things to fall into place and do the work that we need to do in order to make the best out of the circumstances that we as a collective are facing in the world in general.
Yes, I feel you on that. As you know, I'm in LA, and it's been a very chaotic, even tragic beginning to the year. So yeah, I love that this conversation is going to be about pleasure and embodiment and healing, because I do think that pleasure really does sustain us along our ancestral healing journey. And I think it sustains us in the midst of lots and lots of chaos. So I'm excited to dive into the revolutionary act of pleasure, as you have shared. So I'm really glad you're here. And I want to start with a question about your ancestors and ancestry. So what can you share with us about your ancestral background?
So my father was Mayan. I have the Mayan lineage on one side. He was fully indigenous. He was from the region of Chiapas. He was Maya Quiche. My mother is, on the other hand, the mix of Mexican and Lebanese, as my grandfather came as a refugee from Lebanon when he was 5 years old. Right after the Ottoman Empire fell, he came to Lebanon. His father came from Lebanon with his kids. My mother is the result of that mix of the Lebanese heritage and Mexican heritage as well. So I am partly Lebanese, partly Mayan, and a lot of Mexican.
Nice. Awesome. I think you're not the first person with Mexican ancestry, but maybe you're the second. Certainly, I haven't had anybody on the podcast who has the combination of Mexican and Lebanese. So that is super cool. Well, okay, there's so much we can talk about, but I think where I want to take this conversation now is, when did the idea of ancestral healing even come into your consciousness? When did you really realize that I have these patterns in my family and I actually have power and agency to transmute them, to alchemize them? Tell us about your ancestral healing journey.
That has been such a life promise that I made to myself when I was very young. I feel like that's partly because I was very meta observer of my own self when I was little. And now eventually I discovered that it has to do with how my brain works. But I was the child that was always watching for patterns in my parents and in their parents and in my surroundings and eventually in myself. So I remember since I was a little child thinking, okay, I see that my mother is suffering, that she's in pain. I see that my grandmother is suffering, that she's in pain. I see that they are both repeating the same stories, and I don't want to repeat them. I don't want to end up like they, because I could see their frustration, their anger, their loneliness, their pain, and I chose to break that pattern, even before knowing that it was called a pattern, or that it was trauma, or that it was my ancestral lineage. I just knew that they were in pain, and I needed to do something different if I wanted to have a different life from theirs. So it was a promise that I made to myself when I was very little. And eventually life responded to that. I started having trainings in the spiritual communities, gladly guided by the indigenous and people of color. So I started being trained since I was 12 years old. And for me, that's when everything started to make sense, seriously. When I started seeing this experience of them from a bigger lens, not just a personal lens, but the lens of human experiences repeating themselves. And eventually I, of course, grew up experiencing my own journey, my own pain, my own repetition of some patterns and breaking others, until eventually some years ago, I think it formally and openly started in 2020, discovered that the problem behind their personal problems was something that the whole world is dealing with, that it was a systemic problem, not a personal problem, that they were not flawed, that they were the result of something systemic that was designed to keep them oppressed and disempowered. And it was then that I discovered that the problem in quotations, their situation, their issue that I wanted to break from so badly, was actually a systemic issue, and that I needed to see it like that, like a system of oppression that needed to be addressed and recognized.
Beautiful. Well, so let's dive a little deeper into these ancestral patterns. So, what would you say specifically are the patterns that you're dissolving, that you're breaking in your lineages?
First of all, it is the wound of abuse and abandonment from, specifically from men, and then from men in situations of power. So there has been a lot of use and abuse, and I could see that repeating itself constantly. I could see these two very powerful, smart, beautiful women being abused and neglected by the men that they loved, or that they trusted, the men that were supposed to be their partners. And that was particularly hard to process for both of them, because they were both angry and wounded by their very, very painful abuse, and at the same time loving them and wanting to be reconnected to them, to these men who were their fathers or their husbands or their partners. So that is the wound that I could see that they were carrying. And again, I eventually saw that it was bigger than them, because I see that wound happening in many other places, in many other relationships, specifically in Mexico. It's so common to see the pattern of the man that is cheating on the wife, having two or three different families at the same time, having completely neglected his responsibilities towards their families, toward their children or their partners. So I could see that it was something that is common and repeated, so much so that we even make jokes about that. Like we called it the cathedral and the small churches, or the big house and the small houses. We ended up making fun of it as a culture because of how common that wound is. And that is the wound that took place in my house as well.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for sharing all of that. And it's making me think about this thing that we have in common. So, my maternal ancestors are from the Philippines, and many of your ancestors are from the land which is now called Mexico. Both places, both territories, these indigenous places were colonized by the Spanish. And I would say that wound of, men being unfaithful, having multiple families. We made a joke about it too. My family would joke about how my uncles had extracurricular activities. That's what they would call it, right?
Yeah.
But other children, right? Other families. So this, I think, leads us into a conversation about decolonization, and really specifically decolonizing as a spiritual path, as a healing path. So what would you say to somebody who's like, what does that all mean? What does it mean to decolonize? What would you say? I know this is a big topic.
And it's such an important question because now everybody's listening to that word, but there's so much power to it. For starters, understanding that colonization is oppression and abuse and extractionism in one way or the other. Colonization means, in other words, just controlling somebody or their resources and having zero care for the resources, either referring to human resources, to people, to arts, to emotions, to sexual exploration, to any kind of resources. Like, there's no respect. There is just extractionism and abuse because there's a selfish idea of entitlement in which a group believes that they are entitled to whatever is that they desire. In this case, I like to divide it in three levels. We have colonialism as sexism, the idea that there is a gender that has power over other genders. Colonialism as an economic situation in which people believe that they are entitled to the exploitation of natural resources and labor. And colonialism as a racist issue in which one race believes that they are supreme over other races and that they have the power to dominate and to use the labor, the energy, the wisdom, the knowledge, because that's also colonialism when they take our wisdom and our knowledge and our land and they take it for their own benefit. So it's three layers. It's gender, it's economics, and it's race. And all of them are interconnected and interdependent.
Thank you for answering that so clearly. Wow. Well, so how did you get directed towards the VITA program? So that's actually how we met, right? We both went through this coaching training program with Layla Martin that focuses on a tantric approach to sex, love, and relationships with lots of neuroscience woven into it. For me, if I had not gone through that program, I would not be where I'm at today. And I know we've had this conversation before, but doing all of the root healing work inside of that program really defrosted all of the stagnant energy, which turned out to be a lot of maternal lineage wounding, pain, trauma from my maternal ancestors living in my pelvic landscape. But when I signed up for the program, I was not thinking about that at all. I was just called. I was like, there's something here that I need to do. I'm very curious. Like, all of the energy was going that way, but I had no idea what was going to come out of it. Right. And then, fast forward, I guess it's 8 years later at this point. Here I am doing the Cycle Starters podcast, supporting other people on their ancestral healing journeys. I want to know from you, how did you find the program? What drew you to it? And how did that work impact what you're doing now? I know it's a lot of questions.
I love it. So I started searching for a way in which I could fix my relationship because I was living a very unhappy marriage. I discovered that my intimacy was really dying off. My husband and I were barely connected. I tried to fix it by reconnecting to my own body. I usually make the joke that it's like a part of me was dying and I could feel it dying. And then another part rebelled against this. And she was like, no. I want to live. And this part was my eroticism. This part was an eroticism that wanted to survive, that wanted to keep living. And she rebelled against my giving up because I was just thinking, okay, I guess this was it. I guess I should conform with just having had love once in my life with my ex-partner or whatever. Like, I started just giving up. And this part rebelled against that, and she wanted to keep living, to keep going. And eventually that led me to looking for somebody that could reconnect me to the JDEC practice. I had already started doing the JDEC practice after I had my baby, after I had my first child. So I knew the practice. I knew how powerful it could be, but I didn't have like a proper training or teacher with whom I could develop a deeper reconnection with my body. So that's when I started looking for it after Leila Martin's videos started showing up as a response to this prayer of this part of myself that wanted to keep living, that was wanted to survive. And in doing that, I actually started reconnecting not to my partner as much as to myself, to my body, to my pleasure, to my need to feel alive and to feel that I had agency and power over my life. Because the thing is that I discovered that our eroticism is deeply connected to our sense of agency. When we lose this sense of agency over our bodies and our capacity to feel or desire at all, we lose the capacity to build the lives that we want in any level. So I just reclaim my right to desire, to reconnect to this part that wanted to feel alive, and that saved me in many levels, because that led me to the question of, okay, if I can have pleasure, maybe I can have abundance. If I can have pleasure, maybe I can also feel more successful. If I can have pleasure, maybe I can also feel more like I can let these parts of me flow. So I started just wanting more from life.
Beautiful. I love that. Well, so let's talk more about pleasure as a revolutionary act. How would you say your relationship to pleasure has transformed over the course of your life? Starting with your imprints around pleasure.
Totally. And absolutely. I started seeing pleasure as something just sexual, just connected to my sexuality. It evolved into seeing it as life force moving through me. Just connecting to pleasure could be as easy as just connecting to my body right now, to dancing, to moving, to breathing, it started becoming something deeper. And then it led me into questioning, why am I just doing this now? What happened that kept me disconnected, disempowered for so long? Who benefited from me being disconnected from my body, from my pleasure? Because I could see the backlash. I could see that it was scary for people, for social media. Like, we have seen how we have been censored for using words as pleasure. I could see that it was something that was scary for people around me, for social media, for people in power. And that led me to start exploring what lies behind that. Like, if it is something that scares people in power, it means that there is deep power in me reclaiming that. And that led me to finding the amazing author, Audre Lorde. Totally changed my life when I started reading her essay about pleasure, and how for her pleasure is an act of activism, is an act of revolution, because those of us whose identities have been rejected, mistreated, abused for such a long time have to be constantly in survival modes, because that's how the system benefits the most from us. So the moment in which we stop just being in survival modes and start rejoicing in our lives, living fully our lives, we tell the system, you know what, I am so much worthy than what you are telling me I am. I am worthy of the time and the space and the existence and the resources and the air. I am worthy of living. That's for me where the revolutionary aspect lies the most, because it's a reclamation of life at its fullest.
Oh my goodness, beautiful. Preach. We are so on the same page when it comes to this. Well, so I want to shift the conversation a little bit because my monthly membership is called the Ancestral Healing Collective, and it is a sacred space for female-bodied cycle breakers and cycle starters to alchemize deep ancestral wounds, these generational patterns into creative potential, gifts to higher consciousness, embodied joy, and even spiritual gifts using pleasure and astrology as transformative medicine. So I have to ask, and if you don't know, it's okay. Do you mind sharing your sun, moon, and rising sign with our community?
Totally. So I am a Leo. That's my sun. My moon is Cancer, and my rising sign is Virgo.
Okay, cool. All right. Thank you. Okay. So we have the Virgo in common. So I'm a Virgo moon. You're a Virgo rising. Actually, the sister that I just interviewed earlier this morning, she was also a Virgo rising. So yeah, we attract each other. I love that. So as a Virgo rising, that's like the vehicle for your divine mission in this life. Your Virgo qualities are what the people you're meant to serve are very much attracted to. Virgo is mutable earth. Earth is the element we use to build the structures that give us stability and security in our lives. And mutable means it's adaptable and flexible. Virgo can change, though I do find that Virgo can be stubborn in their own ways too, right? Because we want things to be perfect. We're very interested in making things better and refining things. And I also associate healing, honestly, with Virgos because it's ruled by Mercury and Chiron, which is the wounded healer. I also love the Virgo archetype as the virgin, but not the virgin who abstains from sex, but the virgin who is sovereign, a sovereign being unto herself, right? She looks within for power and for wisdom. So I definitely feel like you embody that. That's awesome. So you said Cancer moon. Okay, that's a watery moon. So your Earth rising sign, watery moon, and then your sun sign is Leo, so that's fire. Okay, so that's nice. It's like a nice balance in your big three. You have like three elements there. So, I mean, the Leo sun, this is the devoted performer. This is somebody who is very passionate and sexy and magnetic. I love that. That definitely comes through. There's so much power, right? Fire is our passion, our inspiration, it's intuition. And I find that the Leo journey, the growth journey for Leos is finding the right stage for yourself, but also moving into right relationship with praise and attention. And so some people with a strong Leo presence will really crave the spotlight, like almost be addicted to it. And then you also have the opposite pole, which is they can't take a compliment. They don't want to be in the spotlight. They're really terrified of it. So I was wondering if you could speak to your relationship to being in the spotlight and receiving praise and attention.
You just described me beautifully because I am like that so much. I love the spotlight and I also fear it. I have that constant dance. I love to dance, for example, that just precisely as an example. I love dancing lessons and I would always go and dance. And then the day of the show, the performance, I would dance once and then I would quit dancing because I was overwhelmed by so much attention. Like, oh my God, what have I done? I feel like that's my life. I love coming out and showing and performing. And then I am like, okay, now I need a break. I need to step away. It's been a little too much. And then again, it's like this constant dance. I am autistic. So that leads a sense of a lot of introversion and easily being overwhelmed by stimuli. So I love being seen. I'm the person that speaks when everybody says, okay, everybody has a question. I'm like, hi, or a story. So yeah, I have something to say, but I like to also take times to just stay away from anybody and just be by myself. Like I am in that constant dance.
Well, that's interesting because I feel like what you're describing in terms of needing to be alone and being overwhelmed by energy is very Cancerian. Your Cancer moon, right? This is water. Water represents our emotions, our feelings, our sentiments. Cancer is cardinal water. So it's like initiating emotion. It's like a wave, right? A tidal wave of emotion. And also, you're very psychic, you're very intuitive. Like, that's a given. All the water signs are. But what I have found just reading people's charts is that people with a strong Cancerian presence, especially if it's your moon, because that's your emotions and your ancestral wounds and also the gifts your ancestors gave you. So it's like your emotional inheritance. Like the crab that has to hide in between the rocks when it's molting, when it's shedding its shell that it's outgrown, it's very, very tender in between, right? And so people with a strong Cancerian presence, I find that part of their growth journey is learning their own cycles so that they can work with those cycles instead of being a victim to their cycles. And so there are times where you have to be by yourself, right? Because you are processing something, you are transforming something, you are transmuting something. And I think I was talking to Chloe, who's another Vita sister. She's a Cancer moon, I think, but she has a strong Cancer presence. For her, when she's in the room with a lot of people, it's hard to feel her own emotions because she's feeling everybody else's stuff. And so she needs quiet time and alone time, right? Some solitude to process. So do you relate to that at all?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I am extremely empathic. Like I can feel the emotions of everybody in the room and it can be deeply overwhelming. So I need a lot of spaciousness and solitude and isolation, full isolation after talking to people. I am the person that goes to my room and just stares at the roof for the following hour after I come back home from going just to get groceries. Like it's that level of I need to feel myself again. I need to reconnect to myself because I was feeling everybody in the room. And it's overwhelming. It's a gift in the work that we do because sometimes, of course, we are feeling the emotions of the people that we are working with. And I love it when I do that with people. They are like, how did you know that this is how I was feeling? Because I'm feeling it too.
Right. Yeah, that seems like that's a lot, this Leo sun and the Cancer moon, because those signs are right next to each other, but they're really, really different. So, yes, you have that performer side of you, the side of you that wants to be on stage, that wants to creatively express, but then you can get drained from it and need time alone at home, away from everybody else, right? Because it took a lot of energy to be in, a room with other people to perform. So, I can see how if you aren't aware of how your own energetic signature, how that could be kind of like exhausting, right? But it sounds like you have a lot of self-awareness now, especially with all of the inner work that you've done, that you are learning how to balance that in a way that works for you. But I can see how it would be crazy making for somebody.
Absolutely, especially when I was younger. What happened? Because I would finish the day just like without any energy at all, staring at the wall for hours, not knowing what had hit me. And now I know why, but I didn't when I was younger. And that was really difficult to explain to people why I needed so much isolation.
Okay. Well, so, as a fellow Virgo, I got my Virgo moon, you're a Virgo rising. I have to ask you about your relationship with perfectionism and being hard on yourself. What's that journey been like? Because Virgos can really beat the shit out of themselves, right? They can really have a lot of negative self-talk. What's
Yeah.
that been like for you?
So the negative self-talk has been there all of my life. And then the thing is, I didn't know that I was dyslexic when I was
Mm,
growing up. And that was really hard because dyslexics have this thing in which we have to figure out alternative ways to do things that others do very easily, such as reading or learning the alphabet, things that are easy for people. Like I even needed a language coach when I was growing up because I couldn't pronounce words properly. So, and that's part of being dyslexic. I didn't develop perfectionism in the same way that many people that I know do, because for me it was about getting things done any way that I could. Like, okay,
Gotcha.
this is done. This works. If I go back to checking it over and over again, it will never see the light of day. So it's done. It's not perfect. It's done. And that's because I had this other piece, right? Like I just
Gotcha.
needed to figure out ways to do it. But the inner self-talk was hard because of course I would be criticizing myself like, oh yeah, but I know it's not good enough. I know it will never be good enough. And that was something hard to overcome, and to become more compassionate towards myself took a lot of work.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing all of that and being so vulnerable. I'm curious, would you say that a lot of your clients are also neurodivergent?
Yes. My clients are divergent in one way or the other, either neurodivergent or gender divergent. They have different approaches to their sexuality. It's people that are rebels in one way or another. Mostly it's neurodivergent people, but many times they don't even know that they are neurodivergent. They just know that they don't really feel like they fit. And that's when I recognize that it's the more extensive use of divergent as different, revolutionary.
I love this. Okay. Well, so tell me, what are you working on now that you are excited about that you can share with us?
So I'm working on my program Roots, which is a program that is based on connecting people with our roots, but from a sense of just like I don't like the word mastermind, but it's like just a circle, just creating a circle where we connect, share different experiences, different resources, and just create that space of vulnerability. It's a very private space. Last year it was 3 people. Like I try to make my spaces more private, even if it means repeating the same container for different people, so that it stays very close. And I'm working on my newsletter, my Substack, which is my favorite space because I get to express myself in the spotlight and sharing all of my thoughts, all of my heart. And at this point, that those are the two things that have the most impact in my work.
I love it. Well, make sure you send me those links so that I can put them in the show notes so that people can check them out. So, you know that this is the Cycle Starters podcast, and I ask the same question to every guest at the end of our interview. So, what are the cycles that you are starting in your lineages?
I'm starting a cycle of pleasure above survival. I know that we have survived. Now I want us to live a life of pleasure and thriving. Those are the two cycles that I'm starting in my lineage: pleasure and thriving.
Beautiful. Sasha, thank you so much. So, if listeners or viewers want to work with you or they just want to learn more about your work, where should they go?
So my site is sasha-ostara.com. Um, there they can find some free resources. I have some free booklets and free embodiment practices as well. And they can reach out for more things that I offer constantly. I like to offer workshops. I like to offer readings. I am a tarot reader as well, and I like to offer just programs as well for people to connect with their own pleasure and their bodies.
I love it. And stay tuned. Sasha is going to be teaching inside of the Astro Ancestral Healing Collective in the spring of 2026. So stay tuned for more information about that. But in the meantime, sis, I'm so happy we got to spend this time together. It has been such a pleasure to chat with you and learn more about your journey. I'm so excited for when you will teach inside the collective. But yeah, this was a beautiful conversation. And thank you for everything that you do and all that you are.
Thank you for this amazing invitation and for the work that you are doing. It's so powerful, and for creating interconnection. That's really beautiful. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Sasha, you're awesome. All right, everybody. That's it for today's episode of the Cycle Starters podcast. We will catch you next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye. Are you ready to break free from old patterns and create positive change that ripples through generations? Welcome to the Cycle Starters Sanctuary, a free healing community where ancestral wisdom, astrology, and pleasure converge for conscious evolution and generational empowerment. Join our vibrant community of female-bodied beings across all lineages and cultures committed to breaking intergenerational patterns. You'll get access to monthly live Q&A sessions with guest experts, exclusive content, early announcements about upcoming events, and our free Navigating the Cosmos guide. Ready for a deeper journey? You can upgrade to our Astro Ancestral Healing Collective for an enhanced experience with guided new moon pleasure practices, expert workshops, and a supportive private community. Visit heatherrebeccawilson.com/sanctuary to join our sacred space and start your healing journey today. Together, we're creating new cycles filled with ancestral wisdom, healing, and embodied joy. We'll see you there.